by Walter Schirra, Don Isley, and Walter Cunningham, is orbiting the Earth smoothly tonight. If all goes well, and all has gone well since this morning's launch, Apollo 7 will orbit for 11 days and thus may pave the way for a voyage around the moon in December. A report now from ABC science editor Jules Bergman at Cape Kennedy.
Neither clouds, nor high winds, nor a bulky elevator could stop Apollo 7 today. For 4 long days, the countdown had gone flawlessly. At first, no one believed it. Then, nobody could doubt it. Apollo's time had arrived, 2 years late, but this time, nothing had been overlooked. The wind somehow stayed below becoming a threat, and after a last-minute minor delay, it was go all the way in as perfect a launching as we've ever seen.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. We have ignition. Commit liftoff. We have liftoff. This is launch control. We have cleared the tower.
Roger, tower clear. 12 seconds out and the roll program has commenced. .24 seconds out, and Schirra reports the pitch program has commenced. Seconds, the roll program is complete. Seconds, the cabin is relieving. Schirra reported a little noise. 1 minute. Two minutes, 15 seconds. Inboard engines have shut down. Outboard engines have shut down. Schirra called both events. He's got ignition, and he says we're up to thrust on the second stage. The thrust is okay at 2 minutes, 40 seconds into the flight.
After that flawless launching, Apollo 7 was off and running on its hoped-for 11-day flight. Ahead are a rendezvous with the burned-out second-stage rocket, live TV pictures from space beginning tomorrow morning, and countless other maneuvers and tests. Here's what this Apollo 7 flight is really all about. This spacecraft, this 12 by 13-foot vehicle around which America's hopes of reaching the moon in this decade are centered. How well Apollo and its 3 pilots, Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walt Cunningham, mixed with their spacecraft. The man-machine mix, it's called. And from all signs, it'll be a good mix. How long can Apollo fly? How long will its oxygen, fuel cells, and control fuel hold out? They have to last 10 days before astronauts can safely attempt landings on the moon or flights around the moon. The major test is this onboard service propulsion engine system. It'll be fired up 8 times. Without it, we can't get back from the moon. The 3 astronauts who are pioneering this Apollo flight are as different as men can possibly be. Wally Schirra, 45, the commander, a Renaissance man interested in all things. Easygoing, but a man who cracks the whip when he has to. A veteran of Mercury and Gemini flights, this is his last mission. The agony of preparation is too much to go again, Wally feels. Don Isley, the command module pilot, 38, soft-spoken, a man of few words who has known deep personal tragedy. He's the navigator testing out Apollo's complex lunar guidance equipment. And Walt Cunningham, the 3rd pilot, 36, one of the few civilians in the program, a research scientist as well as test pilot. Cunningham is a fearless iconoclast who will tell off anybody he feels is wrong without pausing for diplomacy. 3 unusual men blazing the way for a unique era, blazing the trail with their Earth orbital flight for the hoped-for American lunar landing next year. The odds of that landing before the end of the decade are now, after Apollo's successful debut today, much higher. This is Jules Bergman, ABC News at Cape Kennedy.
The wives of the Apollo 7 astronauts, Josephine Schirra, Harriet Isley, and Loella Cunningham, are waiting the mission out philosophically and patiently. Mrs. Schirra, whose husband has been in space twice before, put it this way: it's like having your tooth pulled, she said. You dread the first, but after that you become used to it. The first television pictures from the Apollo 7 spacecraft are expected at 11:03 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow. ABC will interrupt programming and will bring you those pictures as soon as they are available. In a moment, an appeal from the President. The Senate today decided against any action during this session of the Congress on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is the treaty that would bar nuclear powers from spreading information and would pledge non-nuclear nations not to seek atomic arms. The treaty was signed last July by 62 nations. Before the Senate's decision, President Johnson made a last-minute appeal for action now.
I know that the pressures of the election are upon us, but so are the responsibilities that we were all elected to fulfill. And so I hope, and I can only hope, that the Senate will act now with the highest interests of the nation in mind. But if the members of the Senate find it either undesirable or impossible to remain and pass upon this treaty now, I shall, after consulting with other leaders here and in the world, and leaders of the Senate, seriously consider calling the Senate into special session. I consider the adoption of this treaty that important to the security of our nation and that important to peace in the world.
Majority Leader Mike Mansfield told the Senate today that the treaty was too important to risk injecting election year politics into the question of its ratification. Later, in the Senate gallery, reporters asked Mansfield if this meant he disagreed with the president.
Not at all. I thoroughly approve of what the president said, both in his radio address to the nation last night and his statement today on the non-proliferation nuclear treaty. He has his responsibility. He's facing up to it. We have a responsibility of our own down here. I'm going against my personal feelings on this matter, because I'm aware of the difficulties which confront us at this time. So while I approve of what the president said most heartily, nevertheless, we have to face the facts of life and do the best we can with them.
Well, is the key fact of life that Richard Nixon wants postponement until January?
Oh, no. The key fact of life is a matter of votes and bodies.
A group of House Democrats have threatened to prevent adjournment of the House session tonight by staying away from the chamber and thus preventing a quorum needed to vote the adjournment. Their objective is to force the Senate to resurrect and pass a bill enabling the three major presidential candidates to debate on television. In a moment, more on politics. Vice President Humphrey continued to pressure Richard Nixon to agree to televised debates. The Vice President offered to guarantee the cost of the debates, which would also include third-party candidate George Wallace. But a spokesman for Mr. Nixon in Dallas, Ron Ziegler, said, "As far as we're concerned, the issue of debates is closed. The Senate has decided not to act, which, it seems to us, closes the whole debate issue for 1968. That's a quote from a Nixon spokesman in Dallas. President Johnson flew to Independence, Missouri late this afternoon to visit former President Truman. Last night, Mr. Johnson stepped into the campaign with a strong endorsement of Hubert Humphrey and sharp attacks on George Wallace and Richard Nixon. Our reporters traveling with the candidates are ready to describe the impact the president's speech has had on each of the candidates. First, Ted Koppel from Nixon Press Headquarters in Dallas.
President Johnson's radio address last night has not exactly thrown the Nixon camp into a cold sweat. The initial reaction, in fact, is one of benign tolerance and understanding. As one Nixon advisor put it, with sweet Christian charity, President Johnson was only doing his duty as a Democrat. This may prove to be the substance of the Nixon response. His people are convinced that they have the advantage on all the principal campaign issues: the cost of living, Vietnam, domestic unrest. They also believe that the only thing left open to the Democrats is the appeal to party loyalty. And this is the category into which they place President Johnson's speech of last night. As professional politicians, they view it without malice, and it would appear without apprehension. This is Ted Koppel, ABC, with the Nixon campaign.
George Wallace is in good spirits these days. He likes remarks made against him by leading political figures, such as those made by President Johnson. A few weeks ago, the strategy of the two major parties was to ignore Wallace. Now, when they attack his campaign, he has the satisfaction of knowing he's getting under their skin. Wallace's support springs from white, middle-class voters who feel abandoned by the old political establishment. So when he is criticized by that establishment that they are rebelling against, it tends to confirm their judgment in supporting Wallace. Tom Jarrell, ABC News, Duluth, Minnesota.
Vice President Humphrey's reaction to the president's speech last night is something like that of a man who's just learned he's won a new car in a raffle. He's delighted with it, but he's also distressed to find out he has to pay taxes. Humphrey is running, frankly, on the Johnson record, but he'd prefer not being tied too closely to the president, whose popularity he knows is at an all-time low. The speech last night was the president's idea. The two men did not consult, but their speechwriters did, and they reached a compromise. The president wanted to put the emphasis on Humphrey, the candidate, the man. The vice president preferred, and the president agreed to do it, to put the emphasis on an attack against Nixon and George Wallace. The only thing that Mr. Humphrey can do right now is hope that the speech does a little good and not too much harm. This is Lou Cioffi, ABC News, with the Humphrey campaign in New York.
In this year of political uncertainty, few candidates are taking re-election for granted. Even the junior senator from Arkansas, who has held his seat since 1945, is trying to make sure he won't be the victim of an upset on November 5th. ABC's Bob Clark reports from Waldron, Arkansas.
J. William Fulbright is the closest thing Arkansas has to an international celebrity. His name and his views on Vietnam are known in every capital of the world. He moves in Washington's most sophisticated circles, even though he doesn't get along very well with people like Lyndon Johnson and Dean Rusk. But this is Arkansas, and Bill Fulbright, as he likes to be called here, is running for re-election, running hard because there's a chance, just a chance, that he might lose. This day's scenario, with the candidate dropping in on farmers at a cattle auction, might be called just plain Bill. The man trying to unseat the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and take his place in Washington is Republican Charles Bernard, 41, wealthy farmer and businessman, but a political neophyte. He's so little known that sometimes when he arrives in a town, nobody turns out at all, and he just sets out down the main street, as here in Brinkley, introducing himself.
I'm Charles Bernard, running for the United States Senate in November against Mr. Fulbright.
Yeah?
I want to give you my card.
Well, okay, glad to meet you. Hi, here,
I
girl.
hope you're going to help me.
Now since you're over Fulbright, man, I'm telling you right now, I'm not. I've read after you some, but,
I'll tell you what, I'll make you a proposition. If Mr. Fulbright comes here and asks you for your vote, forget about me. How about that? You don't expect him to be here, do you?
No, I don't, really, Drew. No, I don't.
Well, that ought to be a fair proposition.
Glad to meet you, Mr. Bernard.
Good
Glad
to see you, and
sir.
I'll send...
Bernard takes a moderate position on Vietnam, modeled after Richard Nixon, but flails at Fulbright for his dovish views and accuses him of neglecting Arkansas.
I've talked to these people. I've tried to find the problems of these people. I've tried to understand these people better. And the one thing that's paramount in the minds of the people of Arkansas is simply this, that Senator Fulbright has forgotten the people of Arkansas.
To rebut the charge that he's forgotten about Arkansas, Fulbright stresses his role in getting federal dollars for such programs as the billion-dollar Arkansas River Development Project. The dedication ceremony provided a crowd bigger than any drawn by Bernard, who wasn't invited, and the chance for a typical Fulbright dig at the Vietnam War.
Someday, I believe, men will agree that the periodic mutual destruction of modern warfare is no more a part of God's plan than were the floods on the Arkansas River, and that by cooperation and diligence and patience, those two can be controlled, as are the waters of the Arkansas River today. You know, it concerns me when I realize that the total cost of this tremendous river project will run the war in Vietnam only 2 weeks.
Arkansas may provide one of the phenomena of this election by voting both for Bill Fulbright and George Wallace. This hawkish state is strong Wallace country, but Fulbright is widely admired, even by some hawks, for standing up to Lyndon Johnson. So, with the prospect that a lot of people who don't agree with him are going to vote for him, Fulbright seemed virtually sure of re-election and return to his role as the ranking congressional dissenter on Vietnam. This may not be very happy news to Dick Nixon, George Wallace, or Hubert Humphrey, but that's the way things look out here in Arkansas. This is Bob Clark in Waldron, Arkansas.
In a moment, the Vietnam report and commentary by Bill Moyers on the bombing. 2 Marine helicopters collided in midair 25 miles southwest of Da Nang today. All 12 persons aboard the choppers were killed. Northwest of Saigon, 400 U.S. infantrymen were flown into battle by helicopter to intercept a communist battalion. They killed 26 in fighting that lasted through the night, but the rest of the enemy force slipped away into the jungle at dawn. U.S. casualties were 6 dead and 16 wounded. ABC guest commentator Bill Moyers, former White House news secretary, has some thoughts on the current stalemate at the Paris peace talks and the bombing of North Vietnam.
Speculation about a bombing pause has ignored one very important question. Why do the North Vietnamese insist that the bombing be stopped before anything serious will happen in Paris? The official reply in Washington is that the communists are hurting and they want to improve their sagging military fortunes on the battlefield. On the surface, a sensible argument. But it's a military and political reply and ignores something very human in the whole question of bombing and reciprocity. This is the question of face. We in this country call it pride or national honor. And to the Asians, it's a very large matter indeed. The North Vietnamese are being attacked from the air by a vast industrial nation with whom they are not officially at war and against whom they cannot retaliate in the same manner. By their logic, before they can meet us as equals at the conference table, we should stop doing to their country what they are not doing to ours. To which the reply in this country will be, but what about the savagery of the Viet Cong? Well, their tactics are savage, but their particular morality does not cancel the fact that to Asians, bombing is a certain kind of racial horror. They remember that the only atomic bombs ever exploded in war were dropped not on a white Western people, but on the colored people of an Asian country, dropped by a nation which itself has never been bombed and does not therefore know what it is doing to other people. One of the hardest lessons to learn in politics is that there are often no good solutions, only less bad solutions. Stopping the bombing may not be a good solution, but others could be worse. If face is a determining factor to the North Vietnamese, and the bombing of their country is an obstacle to progress in Paris, it seems logical to believe that the gamble is worth taking. This is Bill Moyers.
On the New York Stock Exchange today, Dow Jones Industrials were down a fraction. More than 12.5 million shares were traded. The New York Stock Exchange Index was down 1 cent. On the American Stock Exchange, more than 5.5 million shares were traded. The American Exchange Index was up 14 cents. In a moment, a report on the 2 oldest American Olympians. An athletic version of the last hurrah may be played out in Mexico City during the Summer Olympic Games, which begin tomorrow. An old campaigner will try for one more gold medal and a chance to maintain athletic superiority in his own home. ABC's John Davenport explains in this report from Los Angeles.
This is a typical middle-class couple in Culver City near Los Angeles. The husband is a graying school teacher who, like many in his profession, keeps one eye on the textbook and the other on the checkbook. Harold Connolly moonlights at other jobs to make family ends meet and has a hobby. It's hurling a 16-pound ball more than 200 feet in the air at about 70 miles an hour. In track and field, it's called the hammer throw. Connolly's excelled at it enough to set some world records and represent the United States in the Olympics since 1956, despite a crippled left arm since birth. At 37, he's ancient for an athlete. Housewife Olga Connolly also has a hobby. She happens to be the best female discus thrower in the United States. At 36, she's the oldest female member of our Olympic team, while husband Hal is the oldest man. They met during the 1956 Melbourne Olympics when she was competing for her native Czechoslovakia. After she moved to America with Hal, she tried to continue representing Czechoslovakia in athletics, but Czech authorities wouldn't allow it. She became a United States citizen. She still corresponds with old comrades and is saddened by the Russian invasion of her native land. A former medical student, she quit medicine and turned to writing, housekeeping, and raising children. It keeps her busy and involves a lot of sacrifices, but she doesn't seem to mind.
Now, the short story I asked you to read was the $1,000 bill. And I asked you to
Hal gets as much satisfaction from teaching English at Santa Monica High as sports. The world of plot structures and predicates gives him a chance to mold young minds. He himself has contributed to their knowledge by writing on the hammer throw for the Encyclopedia Britannica. This will be the last year of Olympic competition for this gentle giant. The obligations of family and job won out over the glory and the medals. After Mexico City, it will be time to hang up the spikes and the hammer and let the younger men take over. But until then, Hal Connolly will be giving it everything he's got. John Davenport, ABC News, Los Angeles.
ABC begins coverage of the Summer Olympic Games in Mexico City tomorrow with a live telecast of the day's fun and games beginning at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. During the following 2 weeks, ABC will bring you daily Olympic coverage. Consult your local listings, as they say, for the time. That's tonight's news and promotional announcements. I'm Frank Reynolds. Good night.
Special thanks this week to stations WMAL-TV, Washington, D.C., WXYZ-TV, Detroit, KTBR, St. Louis, WFTV, Orlando, and WQXI-TV, Atlanta, for their help in preparing reports from their areas. Governor Nelson Rockefeller of New York and Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts will be interviewed in an hour-long version of ABC News Issues and Answers this Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.